there's trouble, G.I. Joe is there. G.I. Joe, American hero. G.I. Joe is there. It's G.I. Joe against Cobra and Destro, fighting to save the day. He never gives up. He's always there, fighting for freedom.
Hey everybody, it's part of our All Things 1982 series. Today we honor something truly special that launched 1 billion childhood memories that year and still going strong today, which of course is G.I. Joe, a real American hero. We have a giant-sized 40th anniversary celebration planned today with the man behind these unforgettable characters that have given us nearly a half a century of joy and inspiration. We welcome back to our program creator and living legend, Larry Hama. Larry, how are you, sir?
I'm doing good. Thank you.
Joining us today is IDW Publishing story consultant and simply just one of our favorite people. Fans of our show will recognize her from our short film on Joe fans called Duke Be a Lady Tonight. Please welcome back also Miss Diana Davis. Very grateful to you both for being here. We're going to have a lot of fun today. What a time to be able to document such an important anniversary. This right here is the special deluxe version that is the 40th anniversary of A Real American Hero on newsstands now. There's a beautiful foreword that in here that was written by Diana. And I wanted to ask, how did you guys two meet and start working together?
I first met Diana at a training in Los Angeles many years ago.
You mentioned here in your that you had received an email. So Larry, what went into your decision to bring Diana on to work on the book?
One of the problems with the book is there's so much continuity. 300 issues of Real American Hero, plus Special Mission and dozens of other, it's a lot to keep track of. And continuity was never my strong point. You know, I'm a character person and try to keep them as consistent as possible. Lots of times I make major mistakes, you know, like forget who's dead. You know, there's no way to catalog a lot of the stuff. None of the covers matched what was inside the books. It makes research really time consuming. You know, I was spending all my time searching for the actual issue. And so I suggested Diana to IDW. And I said, look, we really need one person who could backtrack all this stuff and keep it in line. They never had one at any of these other companies. The interface between Marvel and Hasbro, not the showrunners, so to speak. They weren't like the guys that were in charge of the line,
right?
Like Kurt Bazigian or Bob Krupis or those guys. It was usually some 22-year-old right out of college who know nothing about comics. At over 100 characters, it was too daunting.
So Diana, talk about, so when you got this email, did you get it from Larry or was it from IDW?
I got it from Tom at first, and I think Larry had sent me a message about same time. It was like, which one do I open first? This is like Christmas.
Right, yeah.
I'd met Tom at San Diego's Comic-Con and geeked out over G.I. Joe with him. And that's the power of networking. Get out there, be nice to people. You never know when that name dangles down and someone says, oh, I know her.
Everybody, the comics in the 70s and early 80s was a small town.
Right.
Everybody in the business knew each other.
So it was able to perpetuate different opportunities. So let's talk about what's in this book here. Putting together a collection, it had to be a daunting task. It's like the greatest hits of 40 years. You would expect issue number 1. Of course, the silent issue, the origin of Snake Eyes, but what went into the decision of including issue number 24?
I have to say, it might have come from me. I had been asked, what are some of the best issues that we haven't reprinted? I got together with a few of my friends in the Joe fandom and I asked them to give me a list. And 24 was a book that we all agreed on. It happens to be my favorite comic. It's notable for the book was drawn by Russ Heath. Now, Russ has a huge history. He's been in everything, a fantastic person. But he also did a lot of the model sheets for the cartoon.
Larry, it was up to you in your decision. What would have made the cut besides the obvious?
Well, I agree about 24. Russ was a personal friend and quite a character. He was the eternal child, really talented. The thing about number 24 is that it really does look like the animated show because he used his own model sheets. Russ passed away, what, 3 years ago?
I asked about 24. It had a kind of a weird thing for me. For whatever reason, 24 was literally the last book that I got of the original 155, and I didn't actually get it till sometime in the early 2000s. It even became a game among me and my friends. This is before mail order and the internet. And anytime somebody would go to a comic book store, they would like, I know, dude, we'll look for 24 for you. And it just,
well, the days of pouring through those bins are over, I think,
Yeah.
And, I wonder how much damage we did to our lungs by breathing in that.
Oh, all that stuff.
So the next thing, of course, is issue 26. Anybody that knows you, Larry, knows your process. It's let whatever may come. But when we get to 26, it's such a quantum leap from everything that had come prior and such a arc in comic book storytelling. What was going on with you in your life at that time that caused you to go with something so personal?
Well, yeah, it did percolate for a while. You take little notes in your head and you sort of file them away. And then sometimes in the creative process, they all fall into place.
It seemed like you really had something to say here. Now had a way to use your platform. There's a line in this book that actually resonates to this day. It says, this is when I guess the Softmaster unarms the guy who's trying to rob his store. And he says, someday the politicians will learn that legislating against objects is utterly useless. And no amount of legislation will deter men from constructing bigger and better engines of destruction. Now, that's pretty freaking heavy, man.
What instigated that was that I'd been reading an article about Okinawa, and it was under the Japanese rule. And the Okinawans weren't very happy about that. Japanese prohibited Okinawans from owning knives or swords. Each village had a chopping block, a knife that was chained to the block. They started using all these farm implements, a farmer's sickle, and attached a chain to the end of it. And it spurred their imagination to create weapons that could defeat the samurai swords.
I think the reason why it spoke to so many people and still does is because on the margin, on one hand, gives this realism. It doesn't ask a lot of you to suspend your disbelief. And in fact, I feel like it's not only your military service, but your commitment to the type of accuracy and the history behind things. I can remember feeling like smart, like I was learning something by reading this stuff. And we have that on this one hand, all the way to something like Serpentor. But you were now at a point in your life where now bringing people, these characters are famously written about people that are actually in your real life. What was happening in your life that was now inspiring you to pull these people from your real world now into your fictional one?
Well, that's what I always did. I don't think I've ever made up a character in my life. It's my way of keeping the characters consistent.
At one point, G.I. Joe was actually outselling Spider-Man at Marvel at that time.
I still couldn't get other work. The only reason I got to write anything was G.I. Joe happened, and every writer turned it down. And literally, I was the last office in the room. You had to get your foot in the door. And I had a huge amount of trouble. Even after G.I. Joe was a big hit, they all told me, oh, it's a fluke. I had been told right from the get-go, if I did a toy license book, I would be the toy guy from then on, and I would never be offered an A-list book for the rest of my life. And they were right. I was never offered an A-list book.
I've got a middle finger for all those editors at that time. Please join me in congratulating the newest member of the Will Eisner Hall of Fame, our man, Larry Hama. Congratulations on getting that this year. It's long overdue, my friend.
Well, it's because what happened was that all the 10-year-olds that were reading my stuff in 92 got old enough to like vote. But at the time that I was doing all this, for the entire run of G.I. Joe, I never got invited to a single con. When the Conan licensing people sued Mattel over He-Man, they hired me as the expert witness. And they were able to provide a letter from Hasbro saying that I was the world's foremost authority on boys' action figures. Because who else was? And Mattel has always been the retirement fund for the CIA. You go see guys in the toy business in New York, and they're all guys named like Murray, you know. Murray or Izzy or whatever. You know? And you go to Mattel, and it's two waspy guys wearing tan suits and rep ties and with stainless steel Rolex Submariner watches on their wrists. And I'm thinking, where have I seen that uniform before? The same guy that created the cruise missile worked on Barbie. He went directly from Raytheon Corporation to Mattel. I was on the phone a couple of times a week to the information service, U.S. Army Information Service in New York. I got to know the colonel there fairly well. There was a bookstore in Manhattan called Sky Books International. 2 floors of very aviation books on naval stuff. And they were like 4 blocks away from Marvel. And that's where I met Lee Russell, who became our technical consultant.
Reading G.I. Joe as a kid, going to school the next day, Mr. Know-It-All, it really served the book well. What inspired you to somehow gravitate away from that into more a fantastical type of scenario?
Well, a lot of that was dictated by the direction that Hasbro was going in. The incident with the Dreadnoks with Jay Leno. He didn't do his bit. He just sat there and he was holding up Dreadnoks and just reading. When
we get to issue 155, of course, A Letter to Snake Eyes, it really felt like, now keep in mind, I was 8 in 82. I'm now 21 in 95 when that came out. It really felt like at that moment that this was you speaking directly to the fans. It was almost like it felt like I've got one shot at this. I've got one issue left, for at least for now, to say what I want to say. Can you speak to that?
Well, yeah, I wanted to make a lot of things clear, about I wanted to reiterate that, hey, you're not going to get a parade.
Earthquake happens, the windows are going to rattle first. Did you know this was coming at all?
That it was ending?
At 155, yeah, the original Marvel run.
Oh, I had about 3 months notice, something like that. I thought, oh, well, there's a whole nother phase of my life. It's gone.
Right. So by 2010, when you got the call to be able to write these characters again, and then for us as fans, it felt like a very serious wrong from our childhood or even adolescence was about to be righted. Did you have any hesitation about returning?
Well, first of all, let me make it clear, nobody was offering me the premiere book, because everybody always thought they could do it better than me.
Many people write Spider-Man, but Larry Hama is G.I. Joe. We won't accept any substitutes whatsoever. When did you come to understand that?
Not until fairly recently. I got no reviews for years. I got very little respect. How difficult it is to sit down every month and write a new story when nobody seems to give a shit. It's really rough. You got to really sort of force yourself to do it, because, man, it's like it's going out into the vacuum. I remember about 10 years ago, I was in San Antonio, Texas at a con. And the con promoter comes up to me and says, Robert Rodriguez would like to meet you. And I went, what? Yeah. Why does he want to meet me?
Yeah.
And so they bring over this guy who's like, a giant. And he says to me, I'd like to buy a Dr. Death sketch from you.
Wow.
And I go, why would you want a Dr. Death? And he says, well, when I was 11 years old, I read Dr. Death in Bizarre Adventures. And that inspired me to make my first movie.
You never know who you're going to reach. You never know who you're going to touch.
Yeah. And that's what started him being a filmmaker. And I was like, what? I was in Tennessee, and this young lady walks up, opens up this envelope, pulls out this postcard that I had sent her when she was like 10 years old. And she had kept it. Marvel printed up all these postcards with scarlet and snake eyes and a blank balloon. I would get hundreds of letters a week, and I would choose the most sincere, and I would send them a reply. That was really brought home to me by Stan Lee. I was sitting in my office with a big stack of letters, and Stan sees what I'm doing. So, you're doing a letter column. And Stan said, you should never forget that you have no idea which one of those letters is being written by some kid in an iron lung.
Diane, I wanted to ask you, I think the reason why it worked is that diversity seemed to be very important. You've got strong female characters marketed primarily to young boys. Can you speak to how this spoke to you as a young girl and what led to a lifelong fandom?
From my point of view, I was a tomboy growing up in a very literate, forward-thinking household. There's no girl books or boy books. There are books. So for me, picking up a comic and watching a show like G.I. Joe and having the toys, it never specifically, from my point of view, was a boy or a girl's thing.
Nobody questioned them. They did the same job as everybody else.
I think reasons boys didn't buy G.I. Jane was not because boys don't like girl things. It's because those boys had been given a message that you better not.
I proposed Baroness. When I put together the first issue, I realized that none of the Cobras had faces, which sort of is bad for dramaturgy. It's a visual medium, your characters expressing emotions through their faces. So I said, okay, I got to come up with a Cobra that doesn't wear a mask, and as a foil for Cobra Commander. So I talked to Herb Trimpe, and I said, look, we got to come up with, let's call her the Baroness. And I think she should be kind of hot. Yeah. Everybody wanted that figure. That's when Hasbro decided, oh,
this is working.
We got to talk about the future of G.I. Joe. I felt again that the 155 cutoff was an injustice. There's something about making it to the 300 mark that feels poetic. So where do we go from here? Do you feel like you got more to say with these characters?
I've already written number 302.
Yeah.
So that answers your question right there. Outstanding. Issue 300 landed on the 40th anniversary. Is just awesome. Again, the issue comes out on November 23rd via IDW Publishing. I want to also remind everybody that we're actually having a Snake Eyes the Movie watch along this Thursday, November the 10th. You have to have an Amazon Prime subscription, and you have to be following along here. When things started again in 2010, we've seen 3 movies since then. But you have written such a perfect story here. What is, in your personal opinion, is keeping them from just telling that story?
Well, they don't seem to understand that you could update the historical stuff. And I've always said that, G.I. Joe isn't a military fantasy. It's a fantasy about loyalty and camaraderie and friendship. You know, because, you know, by the time you're like 7 years old, you've been betrayed.
At least once.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the fantasy about, you know, being part of this group where everyone stands up for you, you know, that if you're in trouble, you know, Snake Eyes will come and get you.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, everyone's on an equal footing. And that's a powerful fantasy. You know, that's why I made, you know, like Snake Eyes is faceless and completely covered from head to foot, because, you know, anybody could imagine that they were him.
That's true.
You know,
but everything is so perfectly on the page here. You know what I mean? Why aren't we seeing the car crash? Why not just follow that script?
well, it's because they're not used to doing that. Like, look, I mean, it took them like 7 X-Men movies for them to figure out nobody's really interested in those other guys except for Wolverine. That's from the production company's lack of faith in the original material. So everybody is familiar with, you know, the TV show and the movies and the toys, you know, but the vast majority of your audience has never read the comic.
Yeah. So you're just saying there's not a wide enough audience for it.
That's what the production people think.
But there's people like us that have been waiting our whole lives for it, though. And I remember you saying, Larry, that one of our previous times that you and I got together to do this, that some director said, hey, I have an idea for Snake Eyes. How about at the end, like he won't talk to the whole movie, and at the very end, he'll say something. And you told them Snake Eyes doesn't not talk because he chooses not to talk. He doesn't talk because he can't fucking talk. It's that kind of cluelessness.
The idea that, oh, the guy can't talk, so at the end of the movie, he'll talk. That's a great idea. Yeah. You can't dissuade them from that, you know? I was a technical consultant on that movie. Yeah. They were paying me to ask me these questions. At the moment that he said that, I realized that I don't give a shit about any of this other stuff that they want to change. Every day I will say, he can't talk.
And
they shot that ending anyway.
Oh, they did?
They shot it.
Oh my God, have you seen it?
No.
But you know it exists, though.
I know it exists.
Well, I think what it'll take me actually finally making that movie. And again, that's going to be a segue here because, of course, our iHeartRadio show, Growing Up 80s, isn't just the title of the program. It's also the title of an upcoming docuseries that'll be coming out next summer that I am the writer and producer for, that will be on Amazon Prime, where I was filming my scenes. We returned to a place that was my favorite time as a kid. And we moved there on Memorial Day weekend, 1982. So this is the very first place where I read Real American Hero on a spinner rack in Nowhere, Arkansas. And I speak up to how much this meant to me as a kid on camera, not to mention just what it scored such a great time as a kid, but also as escapism for a lot of challenges that were happening in my personal life, and being poor and in a poor area and things like that. So for me, being age 8 in 82 to now be 48 in 2022, to be able to celebrate and ring in this anniversary with you, Larry, it would be impossible to exaggerate its personal importance to me. And for that, I thank you. Once again, I want to thank my special guests, Larry Hama, the creator of G.I. Joe, Diana Davis, consultant specialist for IDW Publishing. Guys, again, I told you we were going to have a lot of fun today.
Thanks so much, Roy. It was fun
Thanks for
again.
having us.
Maybe the next time we do this, we'll be able to do it in person over a good bottle of wine or something fun like that.
Yeah.
So
Raise a toast to Russ.
I hope to see you again both soon down the road.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks
Bye,
for having
Roy.
us.
Thanks so much.
Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.